After a season of prayer, Wendy and I just really felt in our hearts that we were entering a season of transition and that God was calling us to plant a church.
Ray and I are called to help people.
We stepped out in faith, and every step of the way, God has been faithful. One of the biggest challenges, though, was simply this. We were portable.
We've heard these wonderful stories about how people get their ministries going and they've got thousands of people and they're just making it happen and they're a big name in their city. And we have been just like the little engine that could.
And so the front door was wide open. People would come and they would absolutely love it, but it had a shelf life where they were looking for something more permanent. I think the question in the back of their minds was, are these guys going to be around? I had a lot of questions. In fact, one of the questions that haunted my mind was, did God really call me to this?
I think God was establishing the word that we believe in and that we have been able to speak into other people's lives. I think God was showing us is, yes, it's applicable to you.
There's so many facets to this story, but one that stands out the most to me is how God did it for us. Well, number one, that he did the miracle, but also how he did it. So several years ago, met this young man. And in fact, when we started our church, he was one of the first ones there, always faithful. He was there to set up and tear down. Now, let me put this in perspective. Because we were portable, setup started at about 7 a.m. So this guy would come, and he didn't come alone. He came with his 2 young children. What stood out about this young man is the fact that he never asked for anything except the opportunity to serve his local church. In fact, when we paid musician stipends, he would always say, nah, Pastor Ray, Pastor Wendy, this is my home church and I do this in service to God in my local church. But I do know if I ever have an emergency, I know that you and Pastor Wendy will respond. Now, this young man, when I met him, gravitated toward me simply because I was willing to go to lunch with him. Well, I still remember one day when he came to visit us, and by now we're church planters. We've moved out of our home in Little Elm. We're living in an apartment complex, and this guy comes by because he has a need. In fact, he had a 1991 Ford F-150 that needed a set of tires. His tires were bald, and at the time he had a young son and a daughter who both had some needs. He comes to the apartment where we were living and he says, hey, Pastor Ray, I have this emergency. Can the church help out? And without hesitation, we wrote him a check. He looks me in the eye. I'm a church planter. We've downsized from our home to a 2-bedroom apartment. There's a guy looking me in the eye who can't afford tires for his truck. And he says to me, I will stroke the first $1 million check to this church. And so in my mind, as a church planter, I'm looking at my situation. I'm in an apartment. I'm looking at his situation. He needs tires. And it's one of those, Lord, I believe, God help my unbelief moments. I took his hand and prayed a simple prayer with him from Proverbs chapter 10 and verse 22 that says, the blessing of the Lord maketh rich, and he adds no sorrow. This one chapter of his life was a chapter of difficulty, of adversity, but we loved him through it. By now, God had started to do some amazing things in this young man's life. And he would always come back to me and say, Pastor Ray, would you pray for me? Pastor Wendy, would you pray for me? I have this opportunity. And as God blessed him, he would give us updates. Well, in November of 2021, I got a call from the executive pastor, and he informed us that their elders were talking and praying about putting this building on the market. We found out later what the asking price was for the building. I knew that our church couldn't do it based on where we were, our giving units, our bank statements, our balance in our account. We needed somebody to spot us, right? Because this was a heavy lift, and I reached out to him, and we began to have the conversation. The building was for sale as is, fully furnished, fully equipped, state-of-the-art technology. And when we presented it to him, he contacted his broker, did all the research, and said, you know what, Pastor Ray, let's go for it. And not only did he come alongside us to assist us, not only did he come alongside us to spot us, in fact, he did the lifting for us. And this young man who in one chapter of his life didn't have enough to buy tires, had trusted God to bless his life, and we had prayed that God would bless him, that now when we asked him for a favor, he was able to underwrite the entire transaction, and we sit in a 26,000 square foot facility, fully furnished, fully equipped, all of the technology, with no debt, paid in full.
And so I am in awe that it really does happen. It really does happen when you trust. It really does happen when you believe. I've watched him pray for 25 years. I've watched him sow for 25 years and believe God for this. This journey has been so beautiful for me, not as a wife, not as a churchgoer, but as a believer in God. It's like, wow, God, you really are faithful. And you're faithful in the little, and you're faithful in the big. I don't even have the words at how grateful I am to God that my children, Mia and Levi, can see that a life in God is worth it, that God does come through. It may not look like what you think it's gonna look like, but that God will be faithful.
So as we sit in this facility and as we sit in this space, it's about more than just what happens on Sunday mornings. We're dreaming about how this space will become a place where 7-day ministry happens, how we can engage our community and serve our community. Because here at Converge Church, there are 3 things that drive us, that define us: Jesus, people, and purpose. In fact, that's why we call our church Converge Church. We believe that our church exists to be the intersection of culture and Christ, because wherever Jesus was, he was ministering to people and he was pointing them to their purpose. Those 3 things define us: Jesus, people, and purpose. So we're asking that question: what do we do next to serve our community and serve people in the way that Jesus would? And we already have a ton of ideas because we see the needs around us, and we're focused on serving and meeting those needs to the glory of God.